Hello and welcome back, Emily Jean if you're new here, and today we are doing another book review and I'm going to review Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. The good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. This is a weird one. So grab your coffee, grab your tea, and let's get cozy. Oh, Mr. Piranesi, what a weird little book. Usually I say who I would recommend these books for, and I would say today I'm not going to recommend this to anybody. Not because it's not good, I did end up giving it 4 stars, but because I think this is a book that needs to find you. I think this is a book that needs to come into your life at exactly the right moment when you are prepared to receive and experience the weirdness that is Piranesi. So if you don't know about this book, we follow Piranesi, who is a character that is in this kind of never-ending home with endless amounts of halls. It's also referred to as a labyrinth. He refers to all the halls by like different fantastical names, and there's all these statues, and there's only one other human being in the halls that he calls the Other, and we come to learn about his journey and his past. That's pretty much the synopsis that I could give you. For my CAWPILE, I did end up giving this 4 stars. I was thinking as I was reading towards the end that it was going to be a 3-star read for me because I was frustrated and angry. But this was a good lesson that if I'm frustrated and angry doesn't make it not a good book. It actually might even make it a really good book because it made me feel things, right? So I was frustrated and angry, not at the writing style, not at the plot, not at the characters. I was frustrated that Piranesi had to experience the things that he had to experience. And that doesn't make it a bad book. That makes it a really good book. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. For characters, I gave it 8. I love Piranesi. I love him. He's so weird. I love all facets of him. He's so present in his life, present in the day-to-day experiences, present in his interaction with the house. It's really a testament to being present in your own life, no matter what the circumstances are. I loved Piranesi. Atmosphere, I gave it an 8. How cool is it to be in these halls with him, to be experiencing this labyrinth of life in the different halls and the waters that come rushing in. So that was definitely an 8 for me. The writing was like a 6. There were definitely some parts that felt disjointed, and I think that was part of the purpose, to make you feel disjointed. But the writing, and you know, Susanna Clarke also wrote Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or Dr. Strange. No, that's not right. Something Mr. Norrell, which is a really big book that I've tried to read a couple of times and DNF'd both. There's something about her writing style that just throws me off a little bit, and I can't quite put my thumb on what it is. I felt that again in Piranesi, but I'm glad that I stuck with it, especially the first like 50 pages. If you can get through those, I think you'll really enjoy this. The first 50 pages, you are like, honestly, it was page 125 when I realized I was sucked into it. So I know that could be a lot to kind of slog through, but if you can get through the first parts where you're figuring out the halls and his terminology and like the strangeness of it, if you can just plow through that part, I think most of us do get sucked in at some point. I did try to pick this up once before and I was like, nope, my brain is not ready for this. I'm not ready to be in this weird world. And so I DNF'd it. This time I stuck through that beginning part. And I'm really glad that I did. But again, still just something slightly off for the writing. I wish I could give you a better description than that, but I just can't. Plot, 8. Intrigue, 8. Logic, 6. There are some things towards, I won't go into any spoilers, but there are some parts in the book that did not make logical sense as far as what we knew about Piranesi and his character, and once I get into the spoilery part of my review, I'll explain that a little bit more. But there were some logical things about the character I didn't think made sense, and not as far as like the world not making sense, but as far as like the character development not making sense for me. And then enjoyment overall was actually a 6. I think I could bump it up to a 7. If I did a 7, would it still be a 4-star? Yeah. We're gonna go ahead and bump it up to a 7. So enjoyment was a 7 because the beginning was a little bit weird, because the writing was a little bit weird in some places, and because the intrigue was a little bit low. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed what it did to my brain. I enjoyed how weird it was. But again, I would not recommend it to anybody because you have to be in the right state of mind to dig into a really weird world when you read this book. This book was actually a good example of how hype can sometimes help around a book. A lot of times if there's a lot of hype around a book, I'm resistant to it. I'm like, but is it? Is it gonna deliver? You go in with way too high expectations, you end up being disappointed. Sometimes the hype works out. Sometimes I just give it and read it anyways and end up loving it. From Blood and Ash series, thought I was going to hate it because of the hype, ended up really, really enjoying it. This was a good one because of all the hype around this book. It's the library book of the month pick at my local library. I've seen it mentioned a lot of places. It has really good reviews on GoodReads. I was like, okay, this time I'm going to stick to it and get through these pages in the beginning. And it worked. That little bit of flexibility, that little bit of push got me through the beginning part to read the rest, and it ended up being a 4-star read and really enjoying it. It is definitely a world that's created that sticks with you for a little bit. I don't necessarily feel like I want to revisit it or I want to live in this world, but it was a fun, interesting place to visit while I was reading. Okay. So that is all my spoiler-free things about Piranesi. If you watched to this point, thank you so much. If you want to hear some of my spoilery reader chats, I only have a few for this book, then hang out because we're going into the spoiler section. Okay. So for my friends still sticking around, if you've read this book, how did you get past the naming of the halls? Oh my God, that every section had a naming of the halls in the beginning. Like the way I read, I like to read every detail and I focus on it and I try to consume it. And it was so repetitive to say on the, let's see, let's just pull up one of the section names. Entry for the 18th day of the 5th month in the year the albatross came to the southwestern halls. Every time I was like, so this time I actually gave myself permission to not read that part for every section. And it's hard for me because I'm like, I'm going to miss something. I'm going to miss a detail. I'm going to miss something really important. I need all the details. But you know what? It worked. It helped. I might have missed some minor details. I don't really know. But that was really hard for me to get past in the first pages. Just the repetitive naming, specifically labeling of the calendar dates. And then also like the hall names became really hard. Like it was hard for me to get into a flow when everything was like the door between the 5th and 4th northwestern halls. I saw a bright yellow speck floating on a gentle tide beneath the 4th western hall. The eastern door of the 1st western hall. Like the descriptions of the halls, it was just a little bit too much for me in the beginning. Did you experience that? Am I alone in that? It goes along with the book. How else would he label the halls? How else would we be able to understand them? But it still just couldn't get into the flow of the book because of all those naming elements. So 125 is actually pretty far into this book. So we're halfway through. It's part 4. And I'm thinking, whoa, I'm in it. I'm in the world. I'm not thinking about the naming things. I'm not thinking about the halls. I'm not thinking about the chapter names, the section names. I was in it and I was walking around the house with him. So that was really cool. So at some point it did switch. And maybe it's just about us getting used to the naming system, or maybe it was because I did give myself permission not to read the little date stamps in his journal log. But I am very glad. Once I was in the world, I was hooked, right? That was cool. But it did take a while. At what point, if you read this, did you get hooked? Were you hooked from the beginning, or did it take you a little while to get into it too? I'd be curious if others experienced it in this way as well. Because at this point, the intrigue had started to get me. What are the missing memories? What is the house? Who are the visitors? Where are they coming from? I had definitely guessed that there was an outside world that people were coming and going from, but I was curious why he couldn't find it. Was there like a block from it? So the intrigue was really high at this point, and I wanted to know all the things. And I was okay that we didn't know the things, because I assumed there was going to be payoff and we would find out what the things were. And we did have payoff, which was really good. So the logic pieces that threw me out that I was kind of referencing earlier were at the end, once we found out he was Matthew Sorensen. How come he still stayed so separate within himself? How come he wouldn't have just popped back into Matthew Sorensen and kind of let Piranesi fly to the side and let Matthew Sorensen lead the way, and then we would have like little flashbacks to Piranesi within him? I thought that would have made more logical sense than Piranesi being the lead in the outside world and Matthew Sorensen still being kind of tucked inside of him. Maybe it's a nod to what the house does and how it changes you, but I just felt like that was what was meant to happen. So that didn't seem logical to me, that Matthew Sorensen wouldn't have come back to himself, being around his family, being back in the world, and that Piranesi would have still been alive within him, but taken the back seat. So that threw me off logic-wise. And then did we ever find out where the professor went? He came to visit Piranesi in the house, but did we ever find out where he went after that? Because once we were back in the real world, they were saying they couldn't find him. Maybe I missed something. I can't remember. Did they say that he was arrested, or that had been before, after he had trapped that other guy? Do we know what happened to the professor? Let me know if you know. I can't remember, or I missed it, or it just wasn't referenced. I also started using a Clockwork reader's journal. I'm not sure that I'm loving it yet, the experience of keeping a reading journal. I wanted to try one this year to see, but I feel like I track it on my CAWPILE, I review it in GoodReads. This is another element that's not necessarily like driving forward my book experience, but just feels like another to do. But there are 2 questions in here that I really like that she asks. And so, what did you learn from this book? And what's the most memorable scene? It helps to bring me back. So actually, even though the beginning was so hard for me to get into, the most memorable scene for me is when he's sitting at the beginning of the book with the 3 waves coming towards him. That's the most memorable scene, most impactful. Now that I've gone through the whole book, that's the most impactful to me. Him sitting there, understanding the tides and the flow, and experiencing the house as the house it is itself, was the most memorable scene for me. And then what did I learn from this book was to embrace the mad parts of yourself. When Piranesi totally succumbs to being Piranesi and embraces those mad parts of himself, he is present in his life. He is able to live day to day and kind of surrender to the experience of life or experience of house. It also really spoke to understanding the environment around you, observing the environment around you, and interacting with the world as it presents itself rather than trying to change or force it, which I think is an important message for a lot of us in a lot of different ways. There was a really beautiful quote when he started to realize his journals that he had written before he lost his memories. And he says, I am less at the mercy of fear and panic. Today I can see that there are sound reasons for studying my journals carefully, even the mad parts, perhaps especially the mad parts. Right? Like, let's dig into our mad parts. Let's understand them. Let's reflect on them rather than trying to hide them away. I thought that was a really interesting take. I also think it's interesting to kind of discuss his perspective on the house and it being like this being or entity, he says, if the house has made you forget, then it has done so for a good reason. This makes me think about belief in God, belief in something bigger than ourselves. Is it something that we naturally cling to and look for when we're lost or alone, the way that he's looking for the house? Is this a commentary on how we find belief and trust when we're alone in the world? Do we always go to this sense that there's something else directing the movements? I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because ultimately the house did not place him there. Ketterly did. Ketterly trapped him in this house, and then he came to love the house. And that's part of why I was angry and frustrated at the end, was because Ketterly placed him there. He was a prisoner in this house, and yes, he adapted and he came to love it, but ultimately he was a prisoner, and he has every right to be so angry and so frustrated. And even though this is the place of forgotten things, the place where things from the real world went when they were no longer remembered, doesn't mean that he deserved to be trapped there, or that the house chose to trap him there. Ketterly chose to trap him there. So why are we putting so much stock in these things? Makes you think. That was also another reason I was like, wouldn't Matthew Sorenso come back as soon as he realized that he had been trapped there, that somebody had taken him from his life and put him there? Wouldn't that anger break him out of being Piranesi? I think so. I think that it would, but maybe the house changed him enough that it didn't. Maybe it's a nod to trauma and adapting and how it impacts you for the long term going forward. Last thing that I wanted to share that I tabbed was just a quote about, I haven't said this last name out loud, D'Agostino? So D'Agostino told a friend that she wanted to go to the university to study death, stars, and mathematics. I think that combination of three things sounds so beautiful. Death, stars, and mathematics. Like, yes, please. I was always afraid of math growing up because one time, just one little time, little Emily was struggling with algebra, and she went up to her teacher and said, "Could you help me understand this?" And he said, "No." And he walked away. He walked away. So I lost the love of math that I had at a super young age, because I felt like I must have just reached my limit of understanding and there was no hope for me. But now as an adult, I'm really drawn back to math and science and wanting to understand these fundamental pieces of our universe and the world around us and astrophysics. And this is a whole other topic I've gone off on. But that combination of death, stars, and mathematics just really spoke to my heart. So if you know any other books that bring to light that combo, death, stars, mathematics, let me know in the comments, because I would love to read and dig into them. I'm starting to listen to a couple of Carl Sagan books because I find those really fascinating. So anything in that realm, fiction or nonfiction, definitely let me know in the comments below. And that's a wrap for Piranesi. So thank you so much for hanging out, watching this review. I appreciate each and every one of you, and hopefully I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye, guys.